is a great disappointment of the last 14 years has been that civil society has failed, that we can't do the things to the Islamists that we would do, as I referred to the neo-Nazis. You know, we just not, it seems we're not set up for it, or people don't have the guts and the balls for it. They just, you know, they fear being called a name more than anything. And, you know, the thing I've always said is, we'll win when an Islamist who is not breaking the law but is saying horrible and hateful things is treated in the same way that Nick Griffin is treated. That's when we'll win. You know, because we all recognize he has a right to freedom of speech and so on and so forth, and if he's not breaking the law and it's a legal party and so on. But, you know, we don't invite him to loads of places. The Quakers don't host Nick Griffin, you know, to have Q&A sessions. You know, the Methodist Church doesn't celebrate the political thought of Nick Griffin. You know, the Anglican Church doesn't have hymn sheets that promote things that Nick Griffin thinks. Of course not. We know what to do with those types of fascists. But societally, we've totally failed to understand, to even recognize, and then to deal with this type of fascism. It's a magnificently terrible failure, and we're reaping the rewards. So we have to wake up to this.
Douglas Murray, he's a best-selling author and founder and director of the Center for Social Cohesion, also a citizen of the United Kingdom, a member of the Church of England. Until recently, you said that your study of the Quran, you said this in print, made you an atheist.
That's right. I said Muhammad made me an atheist. The publisher said at the time, that's a pretty provocative headline. I said, well, get somebody to do the next one. She said, I could find a Catholic who could say Muhammad made me a Catholic. I said, how about trying to make it a three-part article and get the third one, somebody saying Muhammad made me a Jew? And that one would be the trouble.
Douglas Murray, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. I'm sorry to make this panel rather Brit-centric after my colleague Majid. This isn't an attempt by us to have a British takeover of the old colony or anything like that. But I was coming earlier from my own fallen empire, referring back to my friend and colleague Ayan's comments earlier, and I was reading the paper, as I'm sure all of you were doing earlier today. Majid finished his comments by talking about the importance of changing paradigms. I'm not sure this is about paradigms. I think it's about facts. Here are some facts in my newspaper earlier. The Times Square bomber, of course, a man just up the road from here who tried to kill thousands of people. Only, by the way, didn't manage it because he set the 24-hour timing device to 7 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. 1900 hours was what it was meant to be. If he had have got that bit right, thousands of New Yorkers would have died earlier this year again. I see further in the paper 12 suspects arrested in France in a network trying to recruit people to go and fight American and other troops in Afghanistan. I turn to another page of the newspaper in the city I've just flown off from this morning, a Muslim London Underground worker who was, had written to his wife, who was off to try to become a martyr for Allah, as he says. He says, more than anything, I wish Allah to grant me martyrdom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to look at facts. We should also just quickly, if I may, refer something to the wording of tonight's debate. Ayan's already mentioned this, but I mean, let me put it this way. You're I'm sure, a liberal-minded New York audience, or at least I hope you are. We'll see. But I imagine that if the motion we had here tonight was Christianity is a religion of peace, we get to the Q&A, perhaps even before, and somebody would say, if the other side were arguing for that, somebody would say, what about the Crusades? What about that? And then there'd be some other clever clogs who'd say, what about that Florida pastor the other week? That was a nasty business. That's Christianity for you. If we'd had tonight, Judaism is a religion of peace, the other side were trying to argue that. Sure as anything. There'd be people popping up in the hall tonight saying, oh, there's this bit in one of the Old Testament books, really, really bad. All sorts of massacres going on. Why don't you talk about that? There might even be people trying to say that, the argument that Judaism was a religion of peace couldn't be argued because people would say, look at what Israel is doing, and isn't that a direct response, and so on. So let's not have a debate about Islam and whether or not Islam is a religion of peace without talking about the facts to do with Islam. It's an absurd situation we're in, where nothing that anyone does whilst being Muslim is any responsibility of Islam's. Yet anything anyone does whilst being a Christian or a Jew is responsibility of all Christians, all Jews. Let's make this as straightforward as I can. Take the categorization that eminent scholars like Bernard Lewis, Ibn Waraq have made. Let's say Islam is a very, very complex thing. And the best way I can do this in the very short time I have is say you have three Islams. Islam 1, 2 and 3. Islam 1, the Quran and the life of Muhammad and the Hadith. Islam 2, the tradition of the Sharia. Islam 3, what Muslims do now. The first of those things, Islam, the Quran and so on, is bad. It is bad. There is a lot of violence in it. And what's worse, the peaceful verses are superseded by the violent verses. The violent verses also, sadly, are more numerous in number. Then you've got the life of Muhammad. Again, a bad man. A very bad man, it has to be said. Not a great role model, if you look at it. Takes child brides, abuses a small girl, multiple wives, himself a warrior, himself a war criminal, himself beheads Jews. This, I would have thought, would be a signal of not great peacefulness. Then you've got the tradition of the Sharia. Again, not great peacefulness. Still, no schools of Sharia that people in this hall would want to submit to. And thirdly, what Muslims do now. Thankfully, there is some hope in that one. Because most Muslims, thank goodness, I almost said thank God, but old habits die hard. Most Muslims don't do what those texts say. Because they exercise their judgment as moral beings without having to refer to defunct holy books. Now, look, I wish that Zebra and Majid were the spokespeople of Islam. It would be lovely, although in Majid's case it would have taken rather too long if everyone had to go for 14 years preaching the downfall of America and then said, no, not so much. But we are where we are. Anyhow, I wish they spoke for Islam. It would be great. But the fact is that tonight, the organisers of this debate asked a number of clerics. None of them would show. Specifically, they wouldn't show and debate against Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Myself, I don't think they cared. But no, it's very interesting that they will not debate. Time and again, the actual leaders of your religion will not debate this. And you're left with people like we have here. The reason why is, of course, is that the leaders of the religion show such terrible lessons. It is not a small thing. It's not, as it were, a detail. It's not like a wacky Florida pastor. That you've got the largest Sunni state of Saudi Arabia, the most important Sunni state in the world, the most extraordinary closed prison of a society. It's not a detail, it's not a one-off nut job that the Shiite Republic of Iran is what it is, led by the people it's led by. That is not an accident, it's not a detail. The thing that worries me is that although tonight we hear from the fellow panellists here about how Islam is a religion of peace, the fact is that the people who are making the decisions in the religion, the people who are preaching in the religion, the heads of that religion, people like Sheikh Qaradawi, who broadcasts anti-Semitic, the most appalling filth every week on the main networks, that is the faith that's speaking for you guys. I wish that, Zeba, you were on every week on Al Jazeera, but you're not. Qaradawi is. The problem is that Islam is an unstable component, as a religion, an unstable component. 1,000 years ago, the Mu'tazilites tried to reform the religion. They were wiped out. The fact is that Islam is many things, many, many things. But to say it's a religion of peace is nonsense. It's to ignore reality. It's to ignore very difficult but necessary facts. The second thing, it was demonstrated by one of the people who said, this gentleman there, talked about, going to the protest of the Pope rally. If I may say so, this, I wasn't there, I didn't approve of the protest, because there were various things around that I think are complete guff. One of them is the fact that people love saying they went to the protest of the Pope thing. The Pope, the sort of, Pope's not on board with gay marriage. I'm a gay man, I'd love to have gay marriage approved by the Catholic Church. But, they're not going to. Meantime, I really, really wish that people would reserve their ire for the people who don't just want to stop me marrying, but want to throw me off a cliff. Much better way to spend your time. But of course people love it because they think, oh, I'll attack the Islamists, but then to be allow myself to do that, I can attack the Pope to show I'm not a racist. Show me a Monsignor, grab me a cardinal, and I can attack them because that will allow me. This is left-wing nonsense. Again, paedophile priests, you said. You know, if you'd have just stood there and said, you know, I mean, I'm trying to protect Muslims from paedophile imams, people would go, oh, how Islamophobic. And actually, in that case, it probably would be. But you say paedophile priests and smear the Catholic priesthood, and it's not a problem. Thirdly, finally, getting toward the end, a lot of this problem comes down, and the question we didn't get onto tonight, the fact is this. At the end of the Second World War, the Nazi leaders were tried and executed. At the end of the Cold War, it didn't happen. One of the biggest problems we have is the fact that it wasn't resolved. The people who did the largest massacres, the largest number of deaths caused by any movement in history, were not brought to trial. It's thought of as Guardian, the leading left-wing newspaper, had Richard Gott, one of its editors, a paid member of the KGB, a paid KGB agent who said, oh, it was just a bit of a laugh. Oh, and it still is just a bit of a laugh. Because if it's communism, it's a bit of a laugh. 70 million dead here and there, a bit of a laugh. And so on. So please, let's adjust our fucking values. And finally, a lot of this is a simple mental breakdown of the left. I hesitate to say this in the presence of Nick Cohen, who's chronicled this better than anyone. But the mental breakdown of the left. The fact that at so-called left-wing meetings, we have the obsessions with Palestine, for instance. There was one recently, again, I saw Gays for Palestine. Give me a break. If Gays for Palestine were in Palestine, they'd have to move to Israel. Just don't fall for this rubbish. And don't fall for it when it's coming from the right or the far right. And don't fall for it when it's coming from the left or the far left. Have some decency. Thank you. Thank you very much. Tariq says that Europeans associate Islam with violence. There is some truth in that. There is also a very obvious reason for that, which is that Islam is associated with violence. It was not Buddhists who flew planes into the Twin Towers. It was not Hindus or Jews that blew up the London Underground buses a few years ago. And that simple fact has to be acknowledged if you're even going to start a dialogue. Now, what is happening... Ladies and gentlemen, it's not a pantomime. I'd argue that Europe has done not too badly, considering the circumstances. In the middle of the last century, there was an almost negligible Muslim presence in Europe. At the turn of the 21st, in Western Europe alone, there were 15 to 17 million Muslims. That's a very fast migration, ladies and gentlemen, one of the fastest in human history. And no society would find it easy to deal with that kind of migration. As it happens, European societies, Western European societies have, I think, dealt with this much better than some would. Certainly, Muslims coming to live in Britain and in Western Europe enjoy more rights and better rights, among them freedom of worship, than they do in any Islamic country in the earth here today. We do have a problem. We have a problem when the failures of Islam throughout the world, the failures of all Islamic societies, come here into Britain. Their intolerance of freedom of conscience, their intolerance of apostates, their intolerance of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, their intolerance of minorities, other religious minorities, sexual minorities, their intolerance of gays, their dislike and distrust of half of the population, women, and many, many other things. And the call, what's more, for a parallel legal system within Britain and European societies. This is monstrous. No other group behaves like this, asks for parallel laws. This is a fundamental problem, and it's one we're going to have to deal with. It's a problem between a society, Western Europe, that believes that laws are based on reason, and Islam that believes that they are based on revelation. Between these two ideas, I'm not sure there is very much compromise for Europe. It is not Europe that has let down its Muslims, but the Muslims of Europe that have let down Europe. This is not solely something which we have to say we can never reconcile. Of course we can reconcile this, but we need to be honest about it. We need to be frank about it, and we cannot avoid things just because they are unpleasant. And if there were one thing I would wish Muslims in Europe could learn today, as fast as possible, it would be this: that you have no right in this society not to be offended. You have no right to say that because you don't like something, you can commit violence, or you would like something to be stopped or censored. You have no right to have more hate laws, or hate crime laws, or hate speech laws, just to defend Islam. You have to realize, the Muslims of Europe have to realize, that a society in which even your deepest feelings can be trodden upon is the only society worth living in. And the sooner we can learn that, the sooner that Islam can learn that within Europe, the better. It is not Europe that has failed its Muslims. It is Islam that has failed Europe. I'd argue Islam has failed its Muslims. Thank you. I'd first of all say absolutely not to do with our actions abroad, but put that in with one rider. If it were the case that because of our foreign policy people think they have the right to blow up people going to nightclubs and to blow up those fleeing from the first blast, as seems to be the case, then I'd say you have a choice in front of you. Much like the choice we had a few weeks ago over whether or not Britain, the British state, has the right to decide who gets knighthoods, or whether crowds in Pakistan who burn books they can't read have that right. And we have the same choice now, which is whether or not British foreign policy will be run by the British government in the interests of the British state, which I think is the case, or whether or not we just allow other people who let off bombs here or in Baghdad or anyone else who want to terrorize us, whether we allow them to run our foreign policy. That's the choice before us.
But what's your answer to the question? The cause of the terror
is that the cause of the terror is Islamist fundamentalism, which is a version of Islam, a politicized version of Islam, which is wreaking havoc across the globe and has been doing so for many years, and which was aiming to attack this country and our allies before the invasion of Iraq, before the invasion of Afghanistan, and indeed even before 9/11.
Right.
Disagree more. I'm elated by the death of Osama bin Laden, as I think any decent person should be. I think this doesn't demean America. It reminds people of who has been right in this conflict, who the victim is, and who the perpetrator is. Osama bin Laden did not allow any of the 3,000 people in New York and Washington on 9/11 any rights. He took away every single right that any of the people in those cars or their families had. He didn't grant any rights to the families or the victims of the 7/7 subway and bus bombings, which he inspired. It went on, and it's a good thing that the story has now finished. It was military forces that were sent into that compound, and soldiers are trained to fight, and they're trained to shoot and to kill. And if this had been a police operation, then we would have sent police in. America would have sent police in. Pakistan would have sent some police into the building. But it was Osama bin Laden. And they knew it wasn't a police operation. It was an army operation. And in an army operation like that, it's very likely that shooting is going to occur, as it did from both sides, apparently, and that somebody's going to get killed. But I just want this absurdity of all the time of treating people who have broken every single aspect of the rule of law, who then, when they're killed, suddenly all of these people come out and say the rule of law must be applied to Osama bin Laden. We have to remember who the victim is and who the perpetrator is in this. Yasmin says about, we must show, as it were, our principles. We must show that we're better than them. We are better than Al-Qaeda. We don't have to show that, Yasmin.
No, you do.
Yasmin, just wait a second. But the point is what Yasmin is doing, and what many people are doing at the moment, is holding America and our allies to such a uniquely high standard that no society could ever live up to it. That even the worst enemy of a society has to be buried according to the customs that they would want. I can't raise it in me, Yasmin, to think that whether or not the customs around his burial were perfect in your eyes is the most important thing in the bin Laden story.
Then you are as barbaric as them.
Well, we're not as barbaric
you
as
are
them.
as barbaric
Of
as
course
them.
we're not. What? Because we don't do the exact Islamic
And you
burial,
think
we're
you're
as
better,
barbaric.
no better.
It's as if we'd flown planes
You're
into
no
buildings.
better.
This is
You are
moral
no
relativism
better.
gone mad. It's worse than moral relativism. It's an inversion of morality.
You can't choose your morality. Bits. You can't choose bits of it.
Well, you do.
I don't.
You do,
I
and you
live by the
decide to apply moral norms to societies that you dislike, which you wouldn't apply to others.
I'm critical of all people who behave barbarically.
And some worse,
We are not
some more than
better.
others, yes.
No, it's
some
not
worse
true.
than others.
Mr. Ramadan then went on, and I think this is an important thing to talk about, to immigrants. He did exactly the same thing that Mr. Glass did. He treated us as a society as if we were a society that just abuses immigrants, that imprisons them, locks them up. I don't know where he gets that from. I see immigrants all across our streets, many of whom are doing very well. Most people in Britain have welcomed them. There hasn't been mass violence against these immigrants. By and large, they have been welcomed. How does that happen? How would the reverse happen in Saudi Arabia? How would the reverse of that happen in any Islamic culture? Why is it that every Jew in the Middle East has had to go to Israel? Why is it that we have made the de facto agreement that if there is to be a Palestinian state, it has to be Judenrein, clear of Jews? Because we treat them by a different standard, ladies and gentlemen, and we know it, and we will not do what we need to do, which is to say this is what works for us, and this is, we believe, what could work for other people. Mr. Ramadan said that we need dialogue. I agree. Everyone agrees we need dialogue. But where does it start? Would it start, for instance, with making a joke, contra Mr. Khomeini, not a very funny man? Or would it start with an article, perhaps? Would it start, perhaps, with a film? It did, a few years ago, with Submission, and Theo van Gogh was killed. Could it start with making a joke, perhaps? A joke in a cartoon? Well, apparently not. Because we know that there were burnings and killings and lootings and riotings across the globe in reaction to those cartoons. If you're going to start a dialogue, what could you do that would be smaller than drawing a cartoon? If anyone has an idea, please let me know. But this dialogue, which we keep on being offered, is not reciprocated. And we can have the dialogue here, in the West, tonight. But how many of the countries that will be talked about by the other side could we have the same dialogue in? We get to discuss our failings because we are in the West. We get to analyse our failures because we are here, and I think that matters.
Well, let's take it like this. Thanks to the Archbishop's comments, if he saw what he wants to see, a Muslim girl born in this country would, because she was born to a Muslim family, be treated in her courts, in Sharia courts in this country, as being worth half the worth of testifying of her non-Muslim neighbour. That is what would happen. We would be ghettoising people into implying that if you're born a Muslim, you will be run by Muslim law. If you're born a non-Muslim, you'll be run in the normal way that everyone else in the country is. The Archbishop, it's extraordinary we've got to this stage, but the Archbishop, in promoting Sharia law, apart from the fact he should resign, has made life incredibly difficult for progressive Muslims in this country who want to object to Sharia, and he's made it vastly easier for the extremists to see there's something they can get if they hold on long enough. No, this is not to do with the 95% of Sharia, which its apologists say is not to do with hand chopping. The issue of Sharia, which I don't know if you're familiar with this, but if you're dealing with Sharia in this case, it is dictated in the Quran, in the second book of the Quran, that women are worth half that of men. Now, if you want to have a parallel legal system in this country which throws out the rights accomplishments of this country, runs roughshod over them, and decides that women are worth half of you, then I resent the fact that you're trying to speak for anyone, let alone Christians.
Have you actually read the lecture, and did you see
absolutely,
in the lecture...
I read the lecture, and I found out what I could from it, and I listened to the interview he gave, in which, might I add, in his interview, he said that it was wrong that everyone should be treated under the same rule of law in this country. He said that there were problems from that. I don't think there are problems from that. I think that's one of the best accomplishments we've got, that everyone is equal before the law. And the head of your church is saying that it should be different.
You are doing, Mr.
Do you think it's Islamophobic to point out that we think that women should be treated equally to men?
Let me finish. Let me finish. The people should understand, and our fellow citizens should understand, that the Muslims are not asking for a parallel system, and there are many interpretations relating to Sharia, and it's much more open than that, and don't come with something which is a superficial discourse. I'm sorry to say,
Suhaib Hassan was on the television last week, last Sunday night.
Which is not acceptable.
Last Sunday night, Suhaib Hassan from the Islamic Sharia Courts of Britain was on the televisions across this country on Channel 4 saying that he would like in the end for people to be flogged, beheaded, hands chopped off, all that stuff. We know that's where it leads, Mr. Ramadan. We know where it leads.
You are just using the controversy to spread fears in the British society.
There is a good reason to be fearful of Sharia, Mr. Ramadan.
Don't have to go very far in Britain, or the West in general at the moment, to find people's unwillingness to assert the superiority of their values. But they know the superiority of their values because they live with the superiority of their values. I talk at a lot of campuses, and I was at one last night in London where a student got up and started protesting because I had said that an Islamist government was of itself a bad thing, which I think it is. I just said to this student, and it's not a hard question you'd have thought to ask, I just said, well, name me one Islamist government state that you would want to live in. And this is a serious question, ladies and gentlemen. It is also a personal question, and one which, if people were honest, they would admit is personal. As a gay man, there's not a country that's run by Muslims which I could live in. One of my best friends is in hiding again tonight, Dayan Hasiali, because of what she says, and she'd be killed if she went to any Muslim country. And I think that matters. And I think the way in which it affects our personal lives does matter, and we should not ignore it. We have the great blessing of living under this system. And we take it for granted, and we spit on it, and we can because we're living in that freedom. But I beg you, ladies and gentlemen, not to pretend that that means that we shouldn't assert the superiority of that system, because that is what it is. It is a superior system. It doesn't, I would stress this, it doesn't have to be violently asserted. Rights and values are not asserted by violence. They are asserted by showing people your rights. They are shown by example. If you do not speak up for your rights, if you do not say that you think that the rights that you enjoy should not be enjoyed by other people, or people with darker skin, or people in other countries, then I submit that you make a great error of judgment. Mr. Glass treated us to a textbook example of Western masochism. And I know some people in the hall enjoy that, because some people laughed and clapped when he cited Western civilization and epitomized it by what? World War, Nazism, Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo. Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that the West should be treated and regarded only as something which is treated by its lowest moments, and believe that all other cultures and all other civilizations should be treated only by their highest moments, you're already putting in an unequal challenge here. But in Iran, when a couple was shot the other week for holding hands when not being married, the courts congratulated them. Ladies and gentlemen, it does not need you to want to assert your morals violently to say that that stinks and we will not be a part of it. Professor Ramadan is doing is the reverse side of what I hear a lot of conservative right-wing politicians doing now, which is effectively we just have to give them a lot of time. You tend now to hear the thing about people needing their own reformation, Islam being 600 years younger and all this kind of thing. I recently heard exactly the same thing as Professor Ramadan was saying, uttered by Norman Lamont, Baron Lamont of Tehran. He said exactly the same thing. But they need time. Tariq Ramadan said it's going to take time. How much time, ladies and gentlemen? I don't think we have time. And I would beg Professor Ramadan to go around the Muslim world explaining to women in Saudi Arabia they can look forward to freedom in 600 years' time. And that gay people in the Muslim world can look forward to having their first meaningful relationship 6 centuries from now. As a gay man, there's not a country that's run by Muslims which I could live in. One of my best friends is in hiding again tonight, Dayan Hasiali, because of what she says, and she'd be killed if she went to any Muslim country. And I think that matters. And I think the way in which it affects our personal lives does matter, and we should not ignore it. We have the great blessing of living under this system. And we take it for granted, and we spit on it, and we can because we're living in that freedom. But I beg you, ladies and gentlemen, not to pretend that that means that we shouldn't assert the superiority of that system, because that is what it is. It is a superior system. It doesn't, I would stress this, it doesn't have to be violently asserted. Rights and values are not asserted by violence. They are asserted by showing people your rights. They are shown by example. If you do not speak up for your rights, if you do not say that you think that the rights that you enjoy should not be enjoyed by other people, or people with darker skin, or people in other countries, then I submit that you make a great error of judgment.
The only reason that we can consider taking away his citizenship is because we do not regard him as fully British.
No,
and that is a racialised
if I could just correct that.
Correct me, would you?
The problem about what Miriam's just said, among other things, is you can do the thought experiment another way. Let's say a pseudo-state was set up in another country in the world.
It's not a state.
I know it's not a state. You know it's not a state. They think they're a state. They call themselves a state. And a lot of people who burn their passports or go over to fight for them believe they are a state. Let's pretend another pseudo-state was set up from any other religious or other kind of background. If people from Britain were going to that state of any background or any origin, and they were cutting off people's heads and raping women and children and so on, I think this country would take a rather tough stance about it. And I think, among other things, one of the things we would look at was withdrawal of passports, among other things. If you say you are signed up to this appalling state, then maybe we take you at your word.
Miriam's case is there is a racial element.
But there should not ever be.
But
I think something Miriam said that we really must come back on is that somebody is not considered fully British.
Absolutely.
You are either British or you're not.
Well, then you can't withdraw somebody's citizenship. They're British citizens that we have to deal with.
If I can say so, not only has it not got anything to do with race, but the bit that Miriam has not mentioned, which it has a very great deal to do with, is religion. This has a great deal to do with religion, and we have not so far discussed the religious aspect of this, because Islamic State calls itself Islamic State for a reason. They follow certain principles, misguided in your opinion, misguided in my opinion, but certain principles that they say they derive from Islam.
All right,
and any discussion of this has to take them at their word to some extent.
Well, I mean, I think it's very interesting that we would sort of try and essentialise Islamic State. They're very much like any cult or, if you like, I think you can
look at their origins.
If you compare them to any sort of cult or gang, there are usually some similarities with the broader concept from which they're derived. So you get cults that are derived from Christianity. Sure. Very similarly, you would say that Daesh or Islamic State is derived from Islam in some way. Yeah. But I think the problem is to take things at face value and to certainly to corroborate their narrative by accepting their view that it is a state and that they have the legitimacy to call themselves Islamic. It's problematic.
The Waco group in Waco some years ago, everyone was interested in the religious claims they were making when they decided to become this millenarium crazy cult. If I can just finish. This is a crucial thing we cannot avoid. I know it's uncomfortable. I know we want to keep avoiding it, but the religious aspect, which Miriam didn't want to talk about, is a vital part of this discussion. And it's reliant upon Muslims of all kinds to take that on and tackle it.
These are views that are not held or practiced in this country, but people that want to preach this
Those
hatred
views are not
against
held in this country.
Well, let me just explain that. We've got people preaching a lot of hatred and poison against Muslims. Give me one case, even in Muslim countries, where they practice Sharia law, where they go as a routine, hold on, in routine. Most Muslim countries do not do the death penalty, they do not do the stoning, they do not do all these things. This is most Muslim countries that are supposed to run under Sharia law.
Let me...
Some do, but they are...
It shouldn't be necessary to have to shoot this down, but let me do it. Sunni, Shia, two most important distinctions within Islam. The most important Sunni state in the world, Saudi Arabia, executes people for being gay.
The greatest friend of the UK.
He crucifies people, beheads people and crucifies. Recently sentenced to beheading and then crucifixion an underage young Shia man because of his familial connections with the Shia family that the Sunni house of Saudi Arabia didn't want to live. Then let's go to the other side then, to the Shia powers. The most important Shia country in the world is Iran. In Iran, you get killed for being gay, you'll be stoned to death as a woman if you're an adulterer, or hanged from a crane if you're lucky. So please let's not have this stupid cover-up, because we are cleverer than you think we are. Anyone in this country can look at the internet, they can read articles. You cannot cover that over. It's fact. It's what's going on. It's what ISIS is currently trying to do in the territories that it controls. It doesn't come from nowhere. And if we're going to talk about extremism, a great deal... Let me finish this point. A great deal would be improved in this country if people like you came into studios like this and admitted that there is a problem, and admitted that you wanted to join in finding a solution to that problem, instead of trying to pretend that the problem doesn't exist.
Perpetrated 9/11 were not even fundamentalists at all, okay? At all. You guys make this connection all the time. They were not. They were more secular than most. Oh, come on. Then you guys don't even know the history of the people, of the hijackers, of the majority of the hijackers. Okay.
How can you keep speaking, let alone hosting a show, and know so little? How can you know so little and keep on talking? The 9/11 hijackers weren't fundamentalists?
Not in the way that you're talking about the burqa. No way.
Well, I haven't
look at where they came from. This was more of a political act to commit terrorism. It wasn't out of religious belief. You should get to know your history of the people that attacked the Twin Towers.
Babble?
It's not babble at all.
What babble? You are trying to... I don't know where on earth you're coming from on this. No serious person can even keep on saying the nonsense you're coming out with.
Well, if you read the letters that they left, most Muslims wouldn't do that. Read the letters that they wrote. They wrote to their girlfriends. They didn't invoke religious law. I mean, learn something about Islam before you say somebody's talking babble, okay? That's ridiculous.
It strikes me that you're speaking from a position of unique ignorance. I don't know, first of all, why it is you keep on using this term Islamophobia to attack all people who are criticizing fundamentalism. It's a quite cheap way to try to avoid an argument. And then you try to claim that people who fly planes into Twin Towers and the Pentagon and so on and blow up people in my city for the crime of going on the subway are not fundamentalists. Just read the facts of their leader.
Maybe fundamentalists in the fact that they wanted to create terror, but not necessarily out of religion. If you know the history of each one of those attackers, they're not. That's not true at all. That is very ignorant. Right. All right. Let's go to Paris because we're running out of time. Let's go to Paris because we're.
I'm sorry, Douglas. Go and read any of the major texts on this, and you'll learn.